In the year 1629, beneath the cold stones of Bamberg Castle, a German noblewoman named Anna Schwartz lets out a scream that echoes through the torch-lit chamber. The sound doesn't fade. It trembles through the walls. Caught between centuries, a crude wooden wedge, barely 8 inches across, is being driven slowly upward beneath her body. The split is deliberate, inch by inch. And what chills you most isn't her voice. It's the calm figure nearby, the executioner, timing each breath, jotting down notes like a scholar conducting an experiment. That wedge had a name, the Spanish donkey, and what it reveals about the world of justice will shatter what you thought you knew about the Middle Ages. Because this device wasn't born from blind cruelty. It was born from profit. For over 3 centuries, the truth behind who ordered these executions, and why, was buried deeper than the dungeons themselves. But tonight, you'll learn what even official records tried to erase. By the end of this story, you'll uncover 3 truths that may keep you awake long after the screen goes dark. First, why executioners once called this device merciful compared to burning alive. Second, how a Spanish queen ordered it used on her own noblewomen to fuel a hidden financial scheme. And third, the horrifying detail that it was designed with medical precision for women's anatomy, as if cruelty itself had been engineered. If history's dark corners fascinate you, brace yourself, because this descent into medieval horror only grows darker the deeper we go. Let's begin the descent. Picture Europe between 1400 and 1700, a continent burning under the weight of faith and fear. The Inquisition is in full swing. But what you were taught in school, that it was just religious fanaticism, is only half the truth. Behind the sermons and accusations hid a systematic, organized economy of pain. The Spanish donkey first appeared during Spain's Inquisition in the late 1400s, then spread like a plague through Germany, France, and the Low Countries. Official records claimed it was reserved for heresy, adultery, and witchcraft, a sanitized lie repeated in textbooks. Now imagine you're a wealthy widow in 1620s Bavaria. You own land. You possess gold. You decline a marriage proposal from a church official's nephew. Within a week, 3 strangers swear they saw you dancing with demons at midnight. You're arrested. Your property is seized, pending investigation. And your sentence? The Spanish donkey. But here's what no one tells you. This wasn't a crude medieval contraption. It was deliberate engineering genius designed to maximize agony without killing too soon. Metal would slice too cleanly. Wood, however, wood splinters. It tears. It can be carved with ridges that dig into flesh, but avoid the arteries that would grant mercy through blood loss. The device itself stood about 7 feet tall, shaped like a wooden sawhorse, but with one difference. Instead of a flat beam, a sharp wedge cut through its center at a perfect 45-degree angle. The victim was stripped, hoisted above it, then lowered inch by inch until the wedge split the tender flesh between the genitals and the anus, the perineum. But that was only the beginning, because this story isn't merely about pain. It's about control, about how pain became a weapon, an economy, and a performance. Every movement deepened the cut. Every scream was measured, and the longer the body lasted, the more valuable the lesson appeared to those watching. You must understand, the Spanish donkey was not built by sadists. It was built by men who understood anatomy better than most physicians of their time. And that knowledge made them something far worse. In 1577, a Spanish Inquisition torturer named Pedro Ruiz compiled a secret manual titled Matos Preciso, Deagation. It remained hidden in Vatican archives until 1889, and most of it wasn't translated into English until the 1990s. Inside, Ruiz wrote with chilling precision, "The wedge must be 45 degrees, not 40, not 50. 45 cuts through soft tissue, yet spares the bone. A sharper angle, he warned, would end life too fast, a wider one too slow. The wood was to remain rough, never sanded. Splinters, some 3 inches long, would break off inside the body as weight pressed downward. These splinters sealed small blood vessels even as they tore through muscle, keeping victims alive for hours, sometimes days. Ruiz's notes even calculated weight distribution. A woman of 120 pounds, he wrote, would sink naturally to a certain depth within 30 minutes. To hasten descent, executioners added weights to her ankles, but never more than 40 pounds. Too much. And death came too swiftly. The goal was never death. The goal was confession. And after confession came spectacle. Imagine being there. You feel every splinter catch, every muscle scream. You try to lift yourself, but your arms are bound. You shift, and the wedge cuts deeper. 4 to 6 hours of survival on average. And if that sounds merciful, consider this. Ruiz's manual even included a chapter titled Signs of False Confession. If the victim lied just to end the pain, the manual ordered the torture to continue until a true confession emerged. But the real horror wasn't the device. It was the machinery behind it, the officials deciding who would be placed on that wedge and why their names appeared on the lists. Because once historians uncovered those lists, they realized the Spanish donkey had almost nothing to do with faith. It was the mask worn by Europe's largest property theft scheme. By 1630, Europe was drowning in whispers and wealth. The witch hunts weren't random hysteria anymore. They had become bureaucratic theater, with torture as the opening act and confiscation as the grand finale. When a woman was accused of heresy or witchcraft, the first thing seized wasn't her broom or book, it was her property deed. And if she happened to be unmarried, or worse, childless, her lands reverted to the state or the church upon conviction. Each confession carved from human flesh became a legal transaction. Behind the flames and prayers, an empire of accountants thrived. Judges tallied gold, scribes copied deeds, and executioners filed invoices. Even the wedges of the Spanish donkey were numbered like tools in a workshop, property of the state. The brutality you're about to hear wasn't the chaos of mobs. It was order, polished and sanctioned, and the Crown knew exactly what it was doing. Documents uncovered in Madrid's archives show that Queen Isabella of Castile's successors maintained a fund called La Purificación Real, the Royal Purification Fund, for its income. Confiscated property from unholy women. Its expenses? Maintenance of holy instruments and their operators. In plain words, the Spanish donkey was a government-funded instrument of profit. When modern historians examined surviving sketches from Ruiz's Matos Preciso de Agación, something disturbing appeared. The diagrams weren't random doodles. They resembled early medical cross-sections of the female pelvis. Each measurement, each curve of the wooden wedge corresponded to the geometry of childbirth anatomy. It was as if Ruiz and his contemporaries had studied midwives, not to heal, but to reverse engineer the boundaries of endurance. Some accounts describe assistants standing by with heated irons, not to brand, but to cauterize wounds just enough to prevent fatal bleeding, prolonging agony without mercy. One line from a 1614 letter, written by an unnamed French inquisitor, reads, "We are not murderers, but gardeners pruning the root of sin. A woman must not die until she knows why she is dying." The cruelty wasn't random, it was ritualized logic. But then came Anna Schwartz, the noblewoman from Bamberg, the one whose screams opened this story. She survived, barely. When the soldiers dragged her body from the wedge, she was still conscious, half delirious, half miracle. They declared her confession incomplete and left her to rot in a dungeon, assuming she would die within hours. She didn't. She lived 14 more days. Her cellmate, a scribe named Lorenz Eckhart, later recorded her words on scraps of linen, smuggled out through laundry barrels. Those fragments, rediscovered in 1901, contain one of the most haunting first-person accounts of torture ever written. Anna wrote, "I heard the wedge speak before I felt it. The wood creaked like a man drawing breath. Then the fire came from inside me, not outside. I prayed for death, and it did not come. Eckhart was executed 2 weeks later. Anna's writings disappeared for centuries, hidden in the same archive that kept Ruiz's manual sealed away. When they were finally translated, historians realized that her testimony described details identical to Ruiz's manual specifications. Her suffering wasn't a coincidence, it was calculated. In towns like Nuremberg, Augsburg, and Lyon, confiscated estates from witches were sold off at public auctions, often within days of the women's arrests. Sometimes even before trial, and who bought them? The very men who ordered the executions, judges, clergy, and noblemen's families. Every scream from the dungeon translated into coin. Every confession became a legal stamp on the transfer of wealth. By 1650, the Spanish donkey had become less a torture device and more a symbol of order, a warning, a deterrent. Its use declined not because humanity grew merciful, but because paperwork replaced fire. The pen became the new wedge. But before the device vanished from Europe's courts, one final story ensured its legend, an execution so public, so grotesque, that even the church tried to erase the memory. It took place in Toledo, 1655, and it involved not a witch, but a queen's confidant, Lady Inez de Castro, accused of poisoning a royal heir. Her fate would mark the end of the Spanish donkey in official use. But not the end of its legacy. Toledo, 1655. The city square is silent except for the shuffle of boots on cobblestone. At the center stands a woman draped in linen, her wrists bound with crimson cord, Lady Inez de Castro, once the most trusted companion of the Spanish queen. The accusation, poisoning the air, the evidence, none. But her land, vast, fertile, and dangerously independent. When the church demanded her purification, the queen hesitated only a moment. The treasury was empty after years of war. The donkey was cheaper than an army. They brought it out for the last time, a wedge of polished oak, the edges still dark with stains no scrubbing had erased. Witnesses wrote that Inez did not beg. She only asked to see the sun one more time. When the executioner lowered her onto the wooden blade, she whispered something no one heard over the chants of the crowd. Some said it was a prayer, others claimed it was a curse. As the wedge bit through skin and silence alike, the onlookers began to chant, "Justice! Justice!" But within hours, those same voices grew faint, for even hardened soldiers could not bear the sound that followed. She died at sunset. Her body was burned, her ashes scattered, her estate transferred by dawn to the crown. That night, the donkey was dismantled and its pieces buried beneath the castle courtyard. Officially, that was the final recorded use of the Spanish donkey in Europe. For 200 years, history fell quiet about the device. Church documents described it only as a disciplinary bench. Artists who tried to depict it were silenced or ridiculed. It was easier to forget. But in 1894, during renovations near Toledo Cathedral, workers unearthed a rotted beam. Oak, cut at a perfect 45-degree angle, still bearing traces of dried resin and iron shackles. When tested decades later, forensic experts confirmed microscopic remnants of human collagen embedded deep within the wood. 4 centuries after its last scream, the wedge still carried DNA. Historians called it the donkey of silence. Museums refused to display it. Fast forward to the 20th century. In 1941, a Spanish surgeon named Dr. Alvaro Marin studied those same blueprints found in Ruiz's manual. What he discovered was chilling. The pressure, points and tissue patterns, described in the Inquisition texts perfectly, matched modern gynecological diagrams. The Spanish donkey wasn't an accident of cruelty, it was an experiment. In control disguised as faith, even today, scholars argue that its legacy lives on, not as a device, but as an idea that pain can be justified if wrapped in order, religion, or law. In 1998, archaeologists found a fragment of linen deep within Bamberg's archives, words faintly visible beneath centuries of dust. It was Anna Schwartz's handwriting. If you hear this, Remember, they said it was for God, but the Wedge had no God, only men who feared women who could think. Her last words still survive, and perhaps that is why history keeps trying to bury them, because the Spanish donkey wasn't a symbol of witchcraft or sin. It was proof of something far older. That power, once it learns to taste suffering, will always call it justice. If this story shook you, remember, history doesn't vanish. It adapts. Every age invents its own donkey, a system, a slogan, a justification that makes cruelty seem righteous. The names change. The wedges just grow quieter. So the next time you hear someone say, "It's for the greater good," pause and listen carefully, because somewhere, beneath that calm voice, history might still be whispering. History might still be whispering.